The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining Craig and I today for this timely webinar that we'd like to share with you. Today's webinar is how a buyer-driven website accelerates revenue and sales. This is one of our favorite topics that we like to cover with you because it really starts with your brand, starts with your identity, and starts with the engagement that you have with your customers, clients, and partners. So today we're going to talk about how we're going to help transform a website into really the interaction vehicle that you're looking for. How do you build your brand? How do you build that relationship with your buyer? How do you take the buyer through the buyer's journey? And how do you facilitate the acceleration of sales and revenue for the company? So it's a very exciting topic for all of us. So when someone hears about you or hears about your company, what's the first thing they're going to do? The first thing they're going to do is go to your website. So that really is important in terms of how you want to project yourself, how you want to engage your buyer, and how you want to help facilitate their journey, which is now more important than ever than it's ever been. So we'd like to share that with you today, share with you some best practices that we have developed over several years. We'd like to share with you some customer examples to show you what does a buyer-driven website look like. And so we appreciate your participation today. We appreciate your involvement. And feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. Our objective will be to either answer those questions throughout the webinar or to make sure we answer them before we complete the webinar today. So again, thank you very much for joining us, and we appreciate your participation. And here's our agenda. So today what we're going to talk about is what are the challenges that you face today. So as you're scaling your business, running your business, projecting your brand, what are the challenges you have today? And then how do you engage your buyer? Because how you engage your buyer today is very different than perhaps how you would have engaged your buyer 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We'll talk about what is the mandate that every company has, and then we'll identify what is a buyer-driven website. So what are the tenets, the attributes, the characteristics of a buyer-driven website? And then Craig's going to walk you through a couple of different examples. And then what we're going to do is talk about what are the advantages of a buyer-driven website. Finally, in today's webinar, we're going to conclude with how do you make this reality for your company? So this is something we're very passionate about, and we hope you are too. So let's start off with the challenges that we all face. When you go to a typical website, you can think about your own website or think about other websites that you see out there, whether they be B2B or B2C. Oftentimes, the messaging is focused on sellers' services and products, not on buyers' pains and business challenges. That's probably one of the most significant things that we see when we look at different websites. Everybody starts off with their services, their solutions, their offerings, and that assumes that the visitor, the buyer, who's coming to your website already has connected their challenge to your solution. The other thing that we found with a lot of websites out there is that whether it's a service company, a cloud company, or a solution company, what we find is that the communication vehicles, instead of reducing friction with the buyer, actually increase friction. So a good example would be if you went to a website and let's say that that company provides a software solution or a cloud solution. You'll typically see a button which is sign up for a demonstration. So the question we always ask ourselves is, does that facilitate a frictionless buying process, or does that create friction with the buyer? Another challenge for a lot of companies is there's not really a path for self-education or self-service. And what that basically means then is that if you don't have that on your website, it means typically your salespeople or your BDRs or those folks that are out there, your partners, are responsible for educating the audience first. So it becomes kind of a two-step process. If you have breakthrough technology, if you have something that's innovative, you first have to educate your audience on the value and why they need it. And then you have to then look at getting them to budget and to facilitate the purchase of that solution. So a lot of times a website can be a great vehicle for doing that type of self-service, self-education that your target audience is looking for. Another thing that we look at when we look at websites is what we call on-ramps. And on-ramps are on-ramps for adoption or engagement. And many websites today, the challenge with those websites is that an on-ramp maybe go to this web form and fill out these 10 fields, and someone will get back to you. That's another vehicle that creates friction with the audience. So we're going to talk about different ways that you can be very innovative, engaging, and engage your audience early, because the key here is not to go through a whole sales process with somebody and then engage at the end. It's to engage early and really figure out where there's mutual ground, mutual agreement, and move through that process together. So how do you engage your buyer today? Well, let's talk about what the new reality is. And this is kind of important because these are some of the changes that are happening with your buyer today. This is the Corporate Executive Board, and so I'll talk about various sources as we go throughout today's webinar. But the new reality is that about 57% of your B2B buyer is 57% of the way through the buying process before they actually engage sales. That means a typical buyer, when they get involved in looking for how they're going to meet their needs, address their business challenges, they're already doing their investigation on the internet. They're going to different sites. They're going to maybe your site and competitors. They're going to different sources. They may be going to thought leaders in that space. And they're really going and doing their homework. And they're going through that buying, selling process. In many cases, they're doing that on their own without involving salespeople from a company. And so that's typical. And to even hit that idea home further is look at what Gartner and Forrester are predicting by 2020, which is really a scant 3 years away. More than 80% of the buying process will occur without any human-to-human interaction. That's pretty amazing when you start thinking about that, 80%. Now, if you were thinking about this, the ideal situation would be if you had a buyer-driven website that took somebody through the buying process, educated them, created preference, and then your salespeople would deal with that last 20%. They would deal with the final objections, the final preference setting, and the final sales steps that need to happen to convert that buyer into a true buyer and customer for your company. So this is where we're headed. And that's why it's more important than ever that your calling card, which is your website, becomes an instrument of engagement with the buyer and the buyer's journey. Here's a couple more data points that are good. This is from Serious Decisions. 67% of the buyer's journey is now done digitally. And another one, which is 9 out of 10 B2B buyers say online content has a moderate to major impact on their purchasing decision. So we've all heard that content is king, but this is just, again, another good reaffirmation. Now, with this change that's happening, it's also changing sales. So many executives that we meet have come up through the ranks, and they understand consultative selling, working with their clients to really understand their needs in a consultative way. And so one of the challenges that most people have today is that it's harder to reach people today. So in 2007, it took an average of 3.6 cold calls or attempts to reach a prospect. Today, it's 8 attempts. And that's just going to continue to go up. I know one of our clients that we began working with was back in 2010, they were making 3,000 outbound cold calls every month to set up 30 appointments. And so those economics just don't play well in terms of either the ROI you're looking for, or they don't play well in terms of really getting somebody engaged that's your true buyer. And then finally, here's another interesting reality in sales. Only 2% of cold calls results in an appointment. So enough said on cold calling, but that's just not working today. And we're going to share with you some ideas that really are working. So what's the mandate that every company has? Well, it's really to enable the buyer's journey online. And as we talked about earlier, we want to differentiate between what we call seller content and buyer content. Most companies have a lot of what we call seller content. It's about their products, it's about their service, it's spec sheets, it's information about their company, their history, lots of good stuff, but it's not focused on the buyer. So things that are focused on the buyer is what's important to the buyer today. What are the challenges that they have? What are the options that they have to address those challenges? How would they go through the process of trying to make a good decision for their company? How would they validate that decision? So really understanding the buying process is very important. And so we want to talk about how do you have a mandate to really look at the buyer's journey, validate the assumptions that you may have today. Some are correct and some are not. And then how do you create buyer-validated messaging and offers? Now, when we say validated, we're going to talk about how do you validate that information, because most companies create a lot of content, but they don't validate the content with the target audience. Instead, what we'd like to do at On-Demand Advisors is get in the buyer's head, really understand rigorously what's important to them, and then ensure that the messaging, the content, the offers, the journey, all aligns with the buyer that you have out there today. So let's talk about what is a buyer-driven website. Well, a buyer-driven website, from our perspective, is a website that guides the visitor through the buying process online. So every step that needs to happen, education, investigation, preference setting, and in some cases, the actual purchase can be done online. The other thing that we found is that it's synonymous with a frictionless buying experience. And when we say frictionless, we mean that when a buyer comes to your website, they like to get the information that they look for, and they like you to be able to assemble that information in a very easy, digestible journey that gives them immediately what they're looking for. So if you can facilitate that in your online and offline conversations, what you're going to do is eliminate friction and gain preference. Gain preference with your potential buyer, gain preference with your customer, gain preference with your partners. And so we're going to walk you through some examples. So let me just talk a little bit about this customer, and then we're going to have Craig talk about what he did as far as working with the team to actually design this buyer-driven website. This is one of our customers, and they provide a solution. The company is called Logic Bay, and their solution is a partner relationship management system. So if you work with channel partners or third parties, then you're going to need a system to actually manage that channel, work with that channel, help them in terms of recruitment, onboarding, preference setting, education, sales, and so forth. And so they have a great system to be able to do that and provide that system. And what they were looking for is they were looking for a buyer's journey that would make it easy for customers and partners to come to the website and be able to very easily guide them through that buying process. Now, one of the misnomers that a lot of people have is that they think that a buyer-driven website is about e-commerce online. And for many companies that we work with, the actual e-commerce doesn't happen online. It's all the front-end process, though, that needs to happen, which is preference setting, education, and really a lot of the selling process can happen online with most companies. So it's providing that guided and self-guided path to your potential buyer. So, Craig, why don't we go ahead and have you go and walk through exactly what we're talking about here.
Certainly, Bob. So on the Logic Bay website, which you're seeing projected right now, the live version by Bob, we worked with the team to really understand their selling process. So we interviewed the sales team, we talked to them about what are the steps that they go through up front during that sales cycle to better understand their buyer, better understand what are the key questions that are repeated over and over again. And what we tried to do was represent many of those dimensions in an automated way so that those questions are answered up front. By the time a prospect or buyer comes to the website, they understand what Logic Bay is about, they understand what the solutions are offering, they understand what are potential general questions that are being asked of the solution and its implementation, so that the sales engagement can happen at a much deeper level. So as you can see here, what's represented is the buyer flow. It's your challenges, what is Logic Bay PRM, our clients, solutions, pricing, and contact us. Now, these were very specific to the sales cycle of Logic Bay. Now, it may or may not be different for your particular organization, but it is mirrored to what is going on within the sales cycle itself. So we all have, and Bob referenced the dominance of this buyer flow with consumer sites, and that many people don't feel that it's appropriate or how it's applicable for B2B. Well, it's still the same. Psychologically, you're still going through the same steps. You know, whether you're buying a ticket through Southwest Airlines or buying something through Amazon, psychologically, you're still stepping through certain requirements that you need to get to make a sales and purchasing decision. So what you need to do is think of this as, how do you automate some of those front-end components of the sales cycle so that when you are engaged by the buyer, and here's the example again of Logic Bay, that the questions are very specific. So let's go to the next example here, Bob, if you mind going back to the presentation.
And Craig, could you also just walk through on, all times people think about the buyer's journey as being only for the buyer. In this case, one of the things that you did that I thought was really phenomenal is you created a separate buyer's journey for their partners.
Well, yeah, that's a good point, Bob. So in this case, they have a direct market that they sell to, but they also work through a whole partner network. Now, the engagement for a partner is distinctly different, whether it's the steps or the questions or what those partners are seeking is distinctly different than the flow that, say, a direct customer is requiring when they land on the site. So consequently, what we do is we talk to the sales team, we talk to the business development team or the partner team, whichever is applicable, understanding what the steps are, understanding what the questions are, getting into a deep dive as to how we best automate those steps and then represent it on the website. So again, the whole intent, if we steer back to what is the intent of this whole cycle, it's to shorten the sales cycle and increase revenue faster.
Yep, thanks very much. That's absolutely brilliant. And would you like to talk about this? This is another example.
Absolutely. So here's another example that we're in the process of implementing. ICUC, they are the world's largest social media management organization, and in this case, their market is very different than Logic Bay. But they're still selling B2B, and in this case, their sales flow and what they needed to do was very different. So in this case, they're selling vertically. So they're selling into retail organizations, into CPG organizations, into pharmaceutical organizations. So each one of those verticals may and sometimes may not have a different sales cycle and different sales steps. So part of that process is working with the sales team to understand what are the key steps that are relevant to that particular industry and to those prospects, and to represent that flow on the website. And in this case, Bob is showing here on the screen the specific flow that was relevant for the retail industry. And the first step is we understand retail. The next what they found, speaking to their prospect, is they want to know, the customers want to know about other customers in retail, and then they want to talk about retail pains. Then, and only on the fourth step, do they want to understand and get into the solutions that ICUC offers. So this is a big mistake that many technology and B2B companies make, is they think that that the very first thing that they need to lead with is the services or solutions, when in fact that's not the first thing you should be leading with. And in fact, they want to understand who you are, what you're doing, what you're offering. Are you relevant? Or are the customers similar? And so there's a whole psychological flow that you have to bring them through, which is the natural flow that they're going through. And the big mistake that many B2B companies get into is the fact that they try to superimpose their flow onto the buyer. So Bob, I'll turn that back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So a couple points before we leave this slide that if I could add to that, and that is that when you look at this, it really is a great way to engage. So even though social media could be a horizontal service to many different companies, the way that the buyer self-identifies is by vertical. So if I'm in a food and beverage category, I'd love to hear about Starbucks. If I'm in oil and gas, I'd love to hear about Chevron. If I am in banking and finance, I'd love to hear about JP Morgan Chase. So this is the relevant way to take a buyer through the buyer's journey. And this is a great example. The other thing I'd say is, oftentimes when people think about the buyer's journey, they think about that with solutions, or they think about that with some type of configuration. This is a pure services company, which is ICUC. So whether you're providing services, whether you're providing services and hardware or software or other types of goods or products, it doesn't really matter. You still need a buyer's journey that's going to provide this self-service navigating path for your audience. So thanks very much, Craig, for covering that. That's really helpful as far as both of these examples. So the question we get a lot of times when we think about a buyer-driven website is, isn't this just for companies that want to do e-commerce? And the truth is no. If you go back to that CEB report that comes out every year when they talk to executives that are running B2B companies, what they found is that, again, 57% of the sales process is already done by the time that buyer engages a salesperson from the company. So what that basically means is that this whole front-end process of education, preference setting, and really helping the buyer on their initial steps of the journey, all should be done online, and it all should be facilitated. The other thing about a buyer-driven website that's important is that many companies are buying with a committee. What that basically means is that when you go out and you have a presentation, and let's say the presentation is to 3 people at the company, it's fantastic. It's a fantastic presentation. You've done a great job. The challenge is not the 3 people that were in the meeting. The challenge is the other 4 people that were not in the meeting that were perhaps traveling. So now what they're going to do is the 3 people that are excited are going to tell the other 4 people that weren't there about this great company that you have. And the other 4 people are going to go to your website, and they're going to see what kind of information and experience that they get there. So having that symbiotic relationship between the buyer's journey that is guided on their website and also guided through the sales steps is going to be really important so that you don't have a disconnect with your buyer. So thank you for that. Now what I'd like to do is ask everybody one of these wonderful polls. So my question to everybody here, if you could take a moment and opt in here, we'd appreciate that. Here's the question. Give us your characterization for your corporate website today. So is your website an informational billboard, as we normally see when you're driving down the highway? Is your website one that connects with visitors, but there's no buyer's journey on the website? Or do you offer a guided buyer's journey, but can't sell online? Or finally, do you do both? Do you offer a guided buyer's journey and sell online? So go ahead and take a moment, if you would, and respond to that. We'll let everybody have a chance to really participate, and then we'll share the results with everybody on the call. So this is good. And now that we're getting practice, we have another important question coming up shortly, and we'll have a prize for that, which will be great. Okay, so if everybody has weighed in here, I want to show the results to all attendees. Okay, here's the results. So 33% of you that responded said that your website is an informational billboard. And then 67, or the other two-thirds, said it connects with the visitors, but there's no buyer's journey. So for everybody that's attending today's webinar, you don't have a guided buyer's journey, whether you're selling online or offline. And so there is a great opportunity for advancement and moving forward in this area. So thank you very much for participating in that. That's actually excellent. Okay, so let's talk about the advantages of the buyer-driven website. And there are many, but I'd like to cover a couple of them with you. And before we do that, I wanted to share with you a story, and that is one of the companies that Craig and I worked at is a company called Intact. And I was the CEO, and Craig was the CMO at Intact. And what was interesting is that we provide at Intact a best-of-breed financial management solution that is used by many, many different companies, and it's a cloud-based solution. And one of the things that we wanted to check out is, could we sell this online? So we knew that we were going to give the CFO a heart transplant with a new financial solution. And many people thought, no, you can't sell that online. Why would you even try? Because people aren't going to get a heart transplant online. However, what we found is that indeed the audience would look at this, would look at the buyer's journey, would go through that process online, and 20% of our sales came through online, that self-service path. So what we found is that we needed to change our thinking. We needed to update our thinking based upon the audience and what the audience was looking for today. And that was really good. And the other part that's really good is Craig and I found out today that Intact now was just purchased by Sage for $850 million, which is also phenomenal. So we're very excited for all of our friends at Intact and that successful outcome for them in the next step on their journey. So now what we want to talk about is just the advantages of the buyer-driven website. Let me walk you through that and think about which one you think is the most important. The first is to put the buyer in control. Really provide a self-guided process. And that's really what most of us want. When we go to a website, when we're doing our own investigation, we're looking for being in control. So over the years, what's happened is the pendulum has continued to swing from sellers to buyers. And now buyers are really looking at how useful are you in terms of providing information at their fingertips? How useful is your company at providing the information that they want? How useful is your company at providing the experience so that they can get immersed in the experience with your solutions or your services? And so it's about putting the buyer in control. The second thing is, how do you convert interest into engagement? So one of the things about a buyer-driven website is providing along that path, along that journey, a lot of different ways that your buyer can opt in. And we're going to talk about some of those later on in today's webinar. A third area is enabling self-selection. So this is kind of important. The question is, how does your buyer see themselves? How do they see themselves in terms of your company? Do they see themselves as being, as they do at ICUC, in a vertical, in an industry, where they really see themselves, I'm in CPG, I'm in financial services, or do they see themselves in a different area? Do they see themselves from a product line perspective? I'm really only interested in this specific product line versus the other ones that you offer. Or do they see themselves in terms of geography? I'm in EMEA, or I'm in Asia Pac, and I'm looking at different solutions for different areas. Do they see themselves in the size of their company? So this becomes another way that they look at self-selection. Providing immediate and positive gratification. That's what we call the moment of truth. When somebody comes to your website, do they come away gratified? Do they come away excited? Do they come away educated? Another advantage of a buyer-driven website is to accelerate the buying process and simultaneously reduce your cost of sales. Finally, the next two is to really provide that education or preference setting process that can happen. And so how much of your actual sales and buying process can be done, because those are really two sides of the same coin. Buying and selling should be aligned and congruent. And then finally, mirroring your consultative selling process. We have one of our clients in Philadelphia is phenomenal when he presents to his target audience. But as he said, he's not available 365 days a year, 7 days a week, nor is he available to the people that aren't able to be there for his presentation. So how does his website mimic that buying, selling process and enable that same type of learning and conversion that needs to happen? So this is some important points. So here's a question I like to ask, and we're going to have a prize. So please opt in. And the question is, which of these do you feel is the most important advantage for a buyer-driven website? And so take some time, if you would, and go ahead, and the first person that gets the correct answer, we're going to provide a $50 Amazon gift card to. So go ahead and let me know your thought process. Is it putting the buyer in control? Is it converting interest into engagement? Is it self-service selection? Is it positive gratification? Is it accelerating the buying process? Is it reducing the cost of sales? Is it educating, establishing preference, or completing the purchase online? Or is it mirroring the consultative selling process? So appreciate you coming into giving us that information. So go ahead and go over to the box over here and give me your thoughts. So we got a couple answers, and appreciate that. Keep them coming. So what's the number one reason why a B2B company typically wants to implement a buyer-driven website? Now, somebody was very clever and said all, but I do have to ask you if you could pick one. So one question is, where do you type the answers? Well, obviously, you did type the answer in there, so that's great. And we still don't have the right answer yet. So we've got some really great input. Beautiful. Okay, so now we do have a winner. So thank you very much for this. Laurent, you're the winner. Accelerating the buying process. So that's the number one reason why people put in a buyer-driven website, is that they can accelerate the buying process. And all of these are really great advantages. And Laurent will be sending you a $50 Amazon gift card. So thank you for participating in that question. So the other thing I'd like to share with you is that a lot of times what we find is that, and this was true when Craig and I were at Intact, is as you evolve, as your buyer evolves, as your companies and technologies evolve, our thinking needs to evolve. And one of the things that I talked about earlier was that a lot of times many executives still feel today that a lot of the selling process can't be done online or through self-service. And I would ask you to challenge that. And same the way we did that when we were at Intact, which is go ahead and put it in a buyer-driven website and then see how that facilitates better sales, quicker sales, or complete sales. So now what we want to do is spend a little bit of time talking about how do you make a buyer-driven website a reality. So there's a couple of steps that we follow at On-Demand Advisors when we engage and work with our clients. The first is to, as Craig talked about, understanding and mapping the buying process. Here's a great example where on the left-hand side is the seller's journey, on the right-hand side is the buyer's journey. So they need to be aligned. And a lot of times what ends up happening on the seller's journey is that these are sales activities that happen in the process. When you align with the buyer's journey, you do a better job as far as forecasting the business, and actually a better job as far as being able to understand where you are in the buying selling process. Once the buyer tells you that they're ready to move on to the next step, you realize that it wasn't the proposal or the demonstration that made that happen. It was that the buyer has acknowledged in that part of their journey that you have helped them conclude that step so they can move forward to the next step. So this is very good. Another thing we talked about a little bit earlier is self-selection and identification, which is how do people self-identify? Because when you set up the buyer's journey, you want to be able to set it up so that it's going to be meaningful for each buyer. One of the things that we found when we were at Intact is that the buyer's journey would be different depending upon the role that the person has in the company. So if I'm a CFO for a company, I may want to see the type of dashboards and exception management handling that's going to be projected through the system for my company. If I'm in charge of accounts payable, I'm going to be looking at and facilitating how quickly does the system allow me to input the documents, go through the matching process, disperse payments, and so forth. And so it's going to vary depending upon the experience and the needs of each of the different personas that you're working with. Another thing is creating content that's important to the buyer. So what we found here is that there is a set of steps, there is some content and information that is going to be extremely high value to your potential buyer out there. And one of the things that we've talked about in other webinars that is very useful is this notion about doing rigorous market surveys with your buyer. So when we worked with ICUC and we work with them today, we realized that we needed to really understand their buyer horizontally first, but as Craig has architected the buyer-driven website along each vertical, we've also gone out and done rigorous surveys with the decision makers in each of those different audiences. So one audience would be financial services, another audience would be healthcare, another audience would be agencies. So it's going to be very different depending upon each audience. So it's really great to have that type of information and have the actual audience prioritize what's important to them. The other thing along the buyer's journey is what are the on-ramps? What's the way that they can actually engage with you? And here's some examples. So just a list of different examples, maybe a diagnostic assessment, maybe a benchmark analysis. Here's a good example, buyer's guide. You know, if they haven't bought your type of service or offering in the past, maybe they need a buyer's guide on how to be able to do that so that they're going to be in a position to move forward with that decision. Another thing that often is missing is an ROI or business justification assistance that needs to happen. So how do you facilitate that? Because if somebody doesn't have your service today in their budget, how do they actually go and fight and win to get the money based upon the ROI that you can offer their company? So there are a lot of very interesting ways. These are just a number of them that we list here, where you can have excellent ways to engage your buyer along the buyer's journey. One of our things at On-Demand Advisors is if you don't do revenue well, nothing else matters. So the buyer's journey, buyer-driven website, these are all driving paths to the sales, driving paths to revenue. So as a company, we excel in three areas. One is just what we're talking about today, which is a revenue growth strategy. Two is a set of best practices in terms of really being honed and tested. And then third, which is our biggest part of our company, is about execution. So it doesn't make sense to have a plan that says you want to, let's say, grow revenue by 50% year over year and not be able to execute against that plan to make it happen. So we help our clients do that each and every day. And as you can see from some of these logos, we've got all types of clients that we work with, large companies, mid-stage companies, early-stage companies, startups, and really every company, every executive needs the opportunity to focus on revenue and assemble the right tools, such as a buyer-driven website, to enable that growth to happen. So here's a potential next step we'd like to offer everybody, and then we're going to go into a Q&A. We want to offer everybody, and I'll be sending an email to you thanking you for attending this webinar, but we want to offer you an opportunity for us to help you do an assessment. So give us an opportunity to look at your current website, and we'll have a quick conversation about that. But we want to really look at the appropriateness of a buyer-driven website for your company and for your industry. We want to also compare that against two of the competitors, so tell us who those competitors are. And we want to really assess where you are today in terms of self-selection, the buyer's journey, buyer-based messaging, and offers. And so we always love to work with people to help them with their gap analysis, which is where are you today and where do you want to get to? And then how do you get there? What's the plan to get from A to B? Because it's really about making this happen, and time is of the essence today because your buyer and what they're doing today has changed. And so that means that companies need to be nimble, agile, and responsive to the needs of their buyer. So with that right now, what I like to do is let everybody know I'm going to open this up now for Q&A, for questions that you may have. And let's just really see the questions that you have that we can address today. So go ahead and place those questions over if you would. And again, thank you everybody for opting in on our quiz that we had there. That was really great to have your involvement. So let's look at some of the questions that you have today. Let's see. And Ron's already thanking me for his $50 Amazon gift card so that he can go out and spend that and have a grand time and a grand summer. So here's a question that's come from Christina. And Christina's question basically says that she was asking on the buyer's journey, you know, how do you really understand if your messaging is going to be the right messaging for that buyer? And that's a great question. And so what we realized is that a lot of us are very creative at coming up with provocative and interesting messaging. What's missing for most of us is the validation step that has to happen with the audience. So I'll give you an example. One of our customers is a cloud company that we began working with in, again, 2010. And we asked them, since they were selling in the same industry, we asked them if they had ever done a market survey with their buyers. And they've been in that industry for 13 years. So they had a lot of data points. They had a lot of sales. They had a lot of good information. But one of the things that we asked our audience, and they said, yes, we'd like to do this, is we asked them to rank their value propositions on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being I don't care, and 10 being I care a lot about this value proposition. And interestingly enough, when we collaborated with them and put together that interactive survey with the audience, we ranked the top 25 value propositions that they offer. And when we got the response back, I have to admit we were flabbergasted. The response from the audience was that of the top 25 value propositions, the 2 that ranked the lowest were the 2 that they were leading with when we began working with them. So that was really good. That was eye-opening for us, eye-opening for them, to really look at that information and say, wow, if we put more money, more marketing power, more dollars in investment behind our current messaging, it wasn't going to get us where we wanted to get to. So that became really important for us to understand that, because otherwise, without type of validation, we would just continue to do what we've always done, which is focus on our gut and basically go with it. Okay, so let's open it up now for additional questions. Another question here is, a question was we were finding here is on the Logic Bay. You know, the question from Mark is, you know, what has happened to their conversions? That's a great question. So what they found is that what they're getting is they're doing a great job on conversions, but they're finding that they're able to close much quicker, much faster, because the website now is facilitating the discussion that needs to happen with their target audiences, whether that be partners or prospective customers. So that's allowing the set sales team to do a much better job in terms of focusing on the back end of the process, which is the area that is unique to that client, unique to that partner, and focusing on the high value information that individual needs. Okay, let's see. Here's another question, and this is from Claire. Claire asked, how long does it take to put in a buyer-driven website? Good question. For us, we can typically do that in about a quarter. When we work with a company, a lot of times we'll use some great building blocks like HubSpot, or we'll use WordPress, or we'll use some great industry standard tools out there that provide the self-service for the website that our customers are looking for, and the ability to really dynamically add content, change the buyer's journey, and to add dynamic paths. So we're really excited about that. And the first part of that journey is really understanding your buyer and the buyer's journey. It's Craig and the team architecting that, and then figuring out how many different buyer's journeys exist out there. Do we need one? Do we need several like we have with Logic Bay? Do we need many like we need to with ICUC? So what's the right number of journeys that your audience needs to have that's unique for them? And then how do we implement the content and offers that really provides that rich experience, that interactive, rewarding experience that your audience is seeking and looking for? Okay, well, thanks for the questions. And again, what we'd like to do is we'd like to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. Here's our contact information. So if you want to reach Craig or myself, here's our contact information. We have an office in Silicon Valley where we started. We have an office on the East Coast. And we have a great team of over 50 professionals that work for Craig and I, really focused in a number of areas: marketing, sales, business development, and strategy, to help our clients really achieve their end objectives, which is revenue growth, and enabling that buyer experience, enabling that buyer's journey. And the vehicle that we talked about today, of course, is the buyer's journey on the website. So that buyer-driven website becomes a powerful calling card, a powerful conversion vehicle for your company. And we thank everybody for attending today's webinar. And thank you very much. Let us know what questions you have, and I'll be following up with everybody today with a personalized email and next steps. Thank you today, and thank you for everyone for coming and participating. And Laurent, congratulations on you being the winner, the early winner for today.